Nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram itam shri radhika prana natapada sarojayo yena premanubhutyasha dattam tam shri gurum bhaje Caitanya Chandra Charitamrita Shuddha Sindhu Vrindavaniya Surasormi Samunimagna Jevai Jaganni Jagunai Swayamapunanti Tan Vaishnavangscha Harinama Parannamami Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvishe Namaha Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Param Bhojo Radha Madana Mohano Iha Viharati Radha Krishna Kunjadikari Tadubhaya Rasarite Shuddha Siddhanta Dhari Sakala Sujana Geya Krishna Dasa Bidheya Padamakila Gunanam Kaviraja Kavinam Jeva Nahi Bhuje Keva Shunite Shunite Seha Kiadbhuta Chaitanya Charit Krishna Upajibe Priti Janivera Serariti Shunile Borohoihit Shriyatam Shriyatam Nityam Gyatam Gyatam Mura Chintyatam Chintyatam Bhaktash Chaitanya Charitamrta By the grace of Sri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar, Prema Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar, Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, a graceful swan in the inexhaustible reservoir of Chaitanya Lila, wherefrom the very essence of Krishna Lila streams in the 10 directions. Sri Krishna Das Kaviraja Goswami Pad. Again today we will absorb ourselves in Sri Caitanya-caritamrta. We resume in the Madhya Lila, chapter 22, discussion of the Abhideya, and in particular, discussion of the qualities of Vaishnavas, and specifically how Bhagavan's qualities, how all qualities become manifest in bhaktas by virtue of their bhakti. So in the previous class we discussed this payar, which makes this point, and we referred to an analysis of Bhagavan's qualities given by Jiva Gosvami in his Kramasandarbha on a set of verses in the first canto, which are likely what is alluded to by the word Mahat Guna in the payar under discussion, and we looked at this gradation in qualities that he lines out and explains how certain qualities are potentially manifest in jivas, others only in certain manifestations of Bhagavan, and going in a layer of gradation up to a set of a few qualities that are found only in Swayam Bhagavan, Sri Krishna. So that in that way we can understand that although it's said that, quote, all of Krishna's qualities appear in bhaktas, it doesn't necessarily literally mean all of them, but all of the great ones that were mentioned in that passage of the Bhagavatam, or all in the sense of all that can potentially appear in a bhakta. So now today, we'll look at a well-known verse of the Bhagavatam, which gives evidence of this idea, and also an explanation of or evidence of the causation for it, how and why it is that bhakti brings about the manifestation of all qualities into a bhakta. So that should be available in the PDF. So I'm starting from verse 76. This is a statement of Prahlad in the Bhagavatam. He says, Yasyasti bhaktir bhagavatya kinchana sarvair gunais tatra samasate sura harava bhaktasya kuto mahadguna manoratena sati dhavatobati. The suras, along with all qualities, reside in full within one who has unconditional bhakti to Bhagavan. How could a non-bhakta of Hari, running outwards after the asat as a result of desire, have the qualities of the mahats? So it's a rhetorical question, meaning they don't. So why not? That we'll hear about in the commentaries. And who are these suras that reside in bhaktas along with qualities? That also we'll hear some different opinions about in the commentaries. And there's some very nice points made in these commentaries, so they're well worth visiting in some level of detail. So we'll look at Swami Pad, some of Jiva Gosvami, and some of Cakravarti Pad, and a little later some of Sanatana Pad as well on this verse. So all of our acaryas have cited this verse in various places for various evidencing various principles, and it is evidently a verse that drew much of their attention. So first, let's look at the Bhavartha-dipika. And again, I'm just reading my translations. If anyone wants to discuss the details of the Sanskrit passages, feel free to do so. Unconditional or akinchana means desireless or nishkama. So this is very significant. The word akinchana is something that largely, as well as the other word nishkinchana, largely carries conventional meaning, because the etymological sense of the word is simply to be without anything or to have nothing. So to say that bhakti is akinchana, or it has nothing, isn't a put down to bhakti, saying bhakti is worthless or possesses nothing, but rather here it's a qualifier of bhakti. So Samipad explains that by saying having nothing, it means that there's no adjunctive desire coupled with the bhakti. So in other words, it's free from desire. And again, as we've discussed many times, when we say that a bhakta or bhakti is desireless, it means non-desirous of everything except Bhagavan, rendering service to Bhagavan and pleasing Bhagavan. Because that's integral to bhakti, then bhakti is said to be desireless when it's free from any other adjunctive desire than that. So, there's a typo actually. It should be a full stop. So, bhakti is unconditional, meaning it's desireless. So, when you're doing bhakti because you have a desire to get liberation, or you have a desire to become a guru in this world, or you have a desire to go to Svarga Loka, or what have you, then your bhakti becomes conditional, or it becomes with some adjunct onto it. So this is a very fundamental point, which is elaborated on in many other places by Jiva Gosvami Pad and others. When the mind is purified, bhakti to Hari manifests. And then, with the occurrence of its grace, all the devas, along with all qualities, such as dharma and gyan, reside in full, that is, permanently reside there in the mind of the bhakta, graced by bhakti. So, this is Samipad's commentary. So when he's saying that when the mind is purified, bhakti to Hari manifests, we also understand from elsewhere that bhakti is also the only means to purify the mind, actually. This was discussed earlier in the chapter. So when he says bhakti to Hari manifests after the mind is purified, he's referring to what our later acaryas, Rupa Gosvami, Jiva Gosvami, are describing as bhakti proper, or bhav bhakti, prem bhakti, sadhya bhakti. That manifests once all the anarthas are purged, once the mind is purified, and that purification happens by sadhana bhakti. So we can just read Swamipad in the light of Rupa Goswami's line of thought. So, when by sadhana bhakti the mind becomes purified such that sadhya bhakti manifests there, then with that sadhya bhakti, there occurs the grace of bhakti, and by that grace, so to speak, or that lingering or ingrained presence, then all qualities also appear in that person. So does this mean that someone has no qualities, and then once the mind becomes 100% pure, then snap, they get all qualities? No. Rather, we'll read it that there's a gradation, that to the extent the mind is purified, to that extent the grace of bhakti is present there, to that extent qualities start to appear. But when the mind is fully purified, then the qualities reside in full, or they reside permanently in the mind, because there aren't other desires there, or other samskars there, which would eclipse the presence of those qualities, or cause other things other than qualities to be expressed. On account, however, of the impossibility of bhakti to Hari being had by one who is attached to household life, and so forth, how could the qualities of the mahats, beginning with knowledge and non-attachment, be had by such a person? So this is some straight talk here from Samipad. It's impossible for bhakti to Hari to be had by one who is attached to household life. Now, does that mean we all have to become sannyasis? Not exactly. But it does mean that if anyone wants to ever achieve bhakti in the pure sense, they have to reach a state of complete detachment from household life or, worldly interests of all types. This is the no margin for bartering or negotiation. This is the raw truth of the matter, that Vishay itself and any form of Vishay contaminates, conditions the mind in a way that is contrary to bhakti. So any attachment to any form of conventional worldly experience, worldly lifestyle, worldly accumulation, etc., is ultimately antithetical to bhakti. So this is a valuable statement of Samipad. And when such attachments are there, then how can bhakti be present? How can the qualities of Mahatmas, like non-attachment, be had by a person who is yet to be purified of their attachments? It's not going to happen. Such a person is one whose mind is ever engaged in running outwards after the asat, that is, the pleasures of the objects of the senses as a result of desire. So someone can try to do bhakti, they can sit down and try to chant their japa, and then, whoosh, there goes the mind, running outwards after the asat. You focused it on the name, you focused it on the mantra, and then running off it goes. So why is it running off? Because one has desires, because still the mind has so many other samskaras within it, and according to those samskaras, the mind experiences desires for these different pleasures of different varieties of sensory experience, and therefore the mind doesn't remain fixed on bhakti. Therefore the mind is not fully purified, and in that state of not being able to control the mind, of the mind becoming fixated upon various external objects, then how will non-attachment and serenity and peace of mind and respect for all and tolerance and all these things come about in the person? They just won't. Because it's not possible when someone's mind is gravitating and attached to so many other objects to at the same time retain those type of qualities. So we'll look in more detail a little bit later about more on that topic. So,
Maharaj,
yes.
at the beginning of that paragraph, it says, when the mind is purified, bhakti to Hari manifest. So, of course, some are going to interpret that to mean that bhakti is intrinsic. That you just purify your mind and all of a sudden bhakti manifest. That's not what is meant, though, right?
That's not what is meant, right? In other words, bhakti to Hari manifests. From where? It doesn't say it manifests from within. It doesn't say it's already in the mind. It doesn't say it's already in the jiva. It doesn't say it's already in the self. It just says it manifests. So, it implies that, the mind is, when it's not pure, then even though bhakti can try to descend into it, it can't sit there. It won't enter and remain fixed there. But once the mind is purified, then when Hari Bhakti manifests there, it can retain it. It can hold it. remains inside. So someone can try, just like they've tried in so many other cases, to make such interpretations. But if we read the statements carefully, there isn't an implication of inherency, although some might like to try to read it into the text. Clear?
Yes, very nice, thank you.
Okay. So moving on, Sri Sanatana Pad, closely following Sri Swami Pad's commentary in his Digdarshani Tika, adds that the asat can also refer to the insignificant pleasure of moksha. So in so many cases in the Digdarshani on the Hari Bhakti Vilas, Sanatana Gosvami almost verbatim will repeat Swami Pad's commentary and then just add a few things or tweak a few things. So this is another case of that. So we don't replicate the whole Bhavartha-dipika here because the rest of the tika is all the same. The only thing he adds is that the asat doesn't only refer to Vishoy, it even refers to moksha. So this is like a cool, tough statement of a Gaudiya commentator. In other words, to say that moksha is asat, this is interesting. In that, from a conventional Vedantic perspective, moksha is the transcendence of the asat. It's the cherished object, the ultimate purushartha. It's associated with, realization of Brahman. It's considered to be realization of sat. So yet here he's saying that even the pleasure of moksha is asat. So this is from the perspective that bhakti alone is the object. So even the pleasure of moksha is another thing, or it's other than the ultimate reality, other than the object to be achieved, therefore asat. So this is a nice added detail. In Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Sri Rupa Pad states that a primary extrinsic characteristic of bhakti is that it is a bestower of good fortune, shubhada, and to demonstrate that one of the 4 types of good fortune that bhakti bestows is that of being endowed with good qualities and so on, sadgunadi, Sri Rupa Pad cites the verse under discussion in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So, there's this well-known verse, Kleshagni Shubhada Moksha Laguta Kritsu Durlaba Sandrananda Visheshatma Sri Krishna Karshani Chasa, where 6 characteristics of bhakti are described. The first 2 said to start to take place in sadhan bhakti, the second 2 to take place in bhav bhakti, the third pair in prem bhakti. So the second is that of shubhada, or giving good fortune. So among the 4 types that are mentioned, one is having good qualities. So here this verse describes what? It describes good qualities coming to those who have unconditional bhakti. So this is an ideal verse to illustrate this quality that Rupa Goswami is describing. So then, after the citation of this verse in the Sindhu to demonstrate this quality of bhakti, of bringing about the attainment of good qualities, Jiva Gosvami, in his commentary on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, gives the following interesting interpretation. Quote, by usage of the word and so on, here in regard to possessing good qualities. So, Rupa Goswami wrote, Sadgun Adi. In other words, bhakti gives good fortune. What is it? One type of good fortune is having good qualities and other things, or and so on. So what does that and so on mean? So he's explaining that. So by the usage of the word and so on, here in regard to possessing good qualities, Uttam Bhaktis being a captivator of the suras. Who are the suras? Keep listening and you'll find out. Indicating further, its being a captivator of all is taken to be the meaning. So, as the verse said, the suras, along with all qualities, reside in full in the bhakta. So he's taking this sadguna to refer to the qualities mentioned in the verse, and now he's saying that the adi mentioned by Rupa Goswami refers to the suras also appearing in the bhakta, or thus bhakti has the quality of becoming a captivator, or one who can draw in and bring the suras into a bhakta. So here, Uttam Bhakti's being a bestower of good qualities and so forth refers to its being a causer of captivation of good qualities and so forth. In other words, Bhakti can bring good qualities as well as the suras into the bhakta. It has the power to pull them or exert an effect over them. So who are the suras here? Because typically, if you read conventional translations, the suras are translated as, quote, the demigods, or, the rishis, or something like this. So interestingly, Jiva Gosvami takes it like this. Suraha refers to Bhagavan and so forth. That is, along with Brahma, Shiva, Indra et al. It also refers to Bhagavan's companions, devas, sages, and others. This is the meaning. So he doesn't stop just to say that, the devatas, come and exist in the bhakta such that they become, their senses function in an optimal way or something like this, as it might be conventionally interpreted. But he's saying suras can also include Bhagavan and his nityaparikaras. It can also include Bhagavan and his bhaktas. So bhakti has the power such that it brings qualities as well as Bhagavan and his bhaktas into the heart. So this is an unusual or a clever, unconventional interpretation, which is quite nice. And he adds to it, reside in full samasate means remain captivated. In other words, and not just they come and go, but that they remain, they like to be there. Which is to say that bhakti is the supremely pleasing thing. Okay. So now we'll look at Chakravarti Pad. He gives some further comments in the Sarita Darshini, and he goes a little differently than Jiva Gosvami, but he also has something interesting to say. So we'll visit that. And as you can see, he also builds off of Samipad's commentary. Unconditional means desireless. We already talked about this. The suras reside in full only there, that is only in a bhakta, along with all qualities, dharmas, that is knowledge, non-attachment, and so on. He, a bhakta, alone shall be filled with all the devas, and thus only by service to him does service to all who are meant to be served on the path of karma, namely the devas, rishis, and so forth, occur. This is the purport. This is very interesting. So, from the conventional Varnashrama Dhamma culture, the Puranic culture, then people are steeped in this idea that we have duties to the devas, to the rishis, to human beings, to our ancestors, to our family members, to other living beings. This statement is there in the 11th canto. Devarshi bhutapna nrinam pitrinam nakinkaro, etc. Speaking about how a bhakta becomes freed from these 5 debts that every human being is said to have. A debt to the devatas for assisting in the administration of the universe, a debt to the rishis for the knowledge that they've passed on to human beings, a debt to the ancestors for their families, their traditions, their possessions, to their parents, to their living family for supporting them. In this way, everyone is born and by existing in human society has all of these debts. So the karma marg is a whole process of balancing all of these debts by honoring the parents, honoring the ancestors, honoring the devatas, honoring the rishis, etc. So here, Chakravarti, one more point is that, but it is said that those who take shelter in Bhagavan and serve Bhagavan, that all their duties are fulfilled by that service to Bhagavan. This point we discussed at length earlier in the definition of Shraddha. Sarva karma krita hoy, that all the karma is completed just by doing bhakti. So here, Chakravarti Pad gives a clever way of also showing that conclusion here by saying that bhaktas, that devatas actually only dwell in bhaktas and not anywhere else. So if you worship a bhakta, then you're automatically worshipping the devas and everyone else, and therefore you don't need to bother worshipping them independently, but just by worshipping Bhagavan and his bhaktas, then everyone is served and pleased. So this is one purport that he takes. Alternately, the suras, that is Rudra and others who preside over the senses, reside only with all qualities, and not rather with faults in a bhakta. This is the meaning. In other words, the devatas are conceived to control the functioning of the senses, but in some cases they allow the senses to perform inauspicious activities, unwholesome activities, but in the case of bhaktas, they don't allow that. They don't dwell there with faults, but rather with qualities, meaning they dwell there such that the way that all of the faculties of the bhakta are utilized is always in a wholesome, always in an endearing manner. Thereby, he, the bhakta, never has faults such as conceit, born of the senses, beginning with the ego. So a bhakta, because the devatas are there supporting the functioning of all of the senses in a wholesome manner, then they never have, lust, anger, greed, pride, and so forth. This is the purport. So this is another way of looking at the statement. So now he goes to the second half of the verse. How, on the contrary, could a non-bhakta have the faultless qualities of the mahats, that is, the great ones who are possessed of bhakti? They cannot. And if qualities such as being knowledgeable regarding shastras should exist in a non-bhakta, then they shall certainly exist conjoined with faults such as spite and envy. In other words, and you get this a lot of times in practical things where people say, I've been with Vaishnavas, but they were disappointing in their behavior, and I know many non-bhaktas who are so nice, this type of thinking. So one way this verse can be understood is that it's possible for qualities to exist in non-bhaktas, but not the mahat gunas, or not qualities that are free from coexistent or co-located faults. In other words, somebody might be nice, but they're actually being selfish. They're really nice to you because they want to get something from you, or because they want to feel the pride of being a nice person, or what have you. And that attitude that they have and that good quality that they show are localized and not integrated into the ultimate reality that only a bhakta respects and truly serves, but by virtue of having awareness of the paratattva, of the gradation and manifestations of the paratattva, and of an attitude which holistically integrates and honors the whole of existence. So certain things can be appreciable on a localized level from a particular angle. No dispute, we agree. But such qualities are not free from faults, whereas a great bhakta who has unconditional bhakti has mahat gunas, or they have endearing qualities that are perceptibly endearing and also endearing in an absolute or an ultimate and spiritual sense. In other words, they're not conjoined with anything that's unwholesome or harmful to others, and they're not merely expressions of pride or envy or what have you. So, why? Such a non-bhakta is one whose mind is ever engaged in running outwards, that is, after the pleasures of gain, prestige, and so on, which are asat, that is, condemnable by sadhus, or non-existent, in the sense that they are transitory and thus ultimately become non-existent. So when one's aim is some type of worldly pleasure, some type of worldly status, then the mind of such a person is described as running externally, or running after the unreal, running after the unwholesome. So even though that running after the unwholesome might be like polite and pleasant to experience, like a concierge working at a hotel might be really nice to you when he does his job, no objection, that's nice. But nevertheless, the person's actually purpose in being nice is their own pursuit of money and whatever else they're doing, and might be entirely asat in its overall analysis. So this is the point he's bringing out. Alternately, regarding reside in full, samasate, the meaning is as follows. The suras, that is, the presiding devatas of the senses, reside elsewhere, that is, in a samsaric person, certainly along with faults, on account of their being propagators of samsara for a person intent upon samsara. So the devatas allow samsaric people to act and think and behave and speak and so forth in a way that perpetuates their own in bondage in samsara. So that presence of the devatas, so to speak, is with the certain qualities, but also with faults, or also with something that allows for undesirable or unwholesome conduct to take place. They do not reside in full in a person endowed with knowledge, who is possessed of constant contemplation, of dissolution of the psyche, and so forth. So now he's going to hit on the Gyanis here in an interesting way. So I'll just read this one more time. So he's talking about the Suras. The Suras do not reside in full in a person endowed with knowledge, who is possessed of constant contemplation, of dissolution of the psyche, and so forth. In other words, the Gyani, aspiring to realize Nirgun Brahman, wants to disintegrate his own self along with the psyche, along with the mind, buddhi, everything that he's utilizing in the course of following that path and cultivating that knowledge. So, how did the devatas who are present there inside that Gyani, how do they feel about this? This is a bit funny. Chakravarti Pad says, rather, the Suras reside in such persons, verily trembling with fear, thinking, situated in this ungrateful person who wishes to acquire knowledge from us and then completely destroy us, we shall certainly die today or tomorrow. So these devatas are thinking, oh, he was asking for our help in order to cultivate this knowledge, and after he gets this knowledge, he's going to try to disintegrate us. So this is a problematic situation. So in contrast to that, so in the case of karmi people, then they're present but along with faults, and in the case of Gyanis, they're present but in a state of fear. In a person who is a bhakta, however, since a bhakta every day engages the psyche and so forth solely in the sweetness, madhurya of Bhagavan, they, the Suras, reside in full verily with all qualities, thinking as follows, here in this person, we who are mundane and like black iron in nature, shall, as a result of conjunction with the touch of Krishna, become possessed by Krishna, that is, possessed of divine nature, form, and qualities, shall indeed constantly relish the nectar of the sweetness of Bhagavan, and shall verily become immortal. So they're thinking, this bhakta is doing us such a favor, because it's our duty to be present in the psyche and the senses to enable these functions to take place, and this bhakta is therefore engaging us in drinking Bhagavan's madhurya. This is going to profoundly, supremely benefit us spiritually. This bhakta is doing us a great favor. Thus, they become motionless out of blissful astonishment. In other words, thus the devatas have fainted in ecstasy in the midst of this bhakta. The presiding devatas of the senses joyfully ever reside unwaveringly within a bhakta along with all qualities. Why are they always in the bhakta? Because they fainted out of bliss. There's no way they could leave. This is the meaning, and the meaning of the rest of the verse is the same if you analyze the rest of the verse, apart from these alternate interpretations he's giving here. So, very colorful analysis from Sri Chakravarti Pad. So, from the aforesaid commentaries, it can be clearly understood how and why all qualities become manifest in bhaktas of Sri Bhagavan. So, by virtue of bhakti, then the devatas, along with, or more broadly, Bhagavan and his parikaras, are all captivated such that they, along with all qualities, reside in a bhakta. So it's bhakti that brings about the presence of all of these qualities. So someone who doesn't have bhakti, who doesn't have that purity of mind, they'll never have qualities of this nature. They might be perceived on occasion to have some appreciable qualities, yet those qualities are not free from some taint and are not the same as the qualities of Mahatmas. So this is the analysis, and again, the purpose of this citation was to give evidence for this idea that Krishna's qualities become manifest in bhaktas. So in particular, Jiva Goswami's interpretation, where he interpreted suras to refer to Bhagavan in his parikaras along with devas and rishis, gives us direct evidence for the statement in the Payar in the statement of the Bhagavatam. So, now we can move on. In the following Payar, an introduction to an enumeration of the qualities that become manifest in bhaktas is present. So this verse is saying all qualities come, and the previous verse said all of Krishna's qualities come, but it hasn't specified which qualities. So in the commentary we did last week, we got some analysis of which qualities are potentially there, but now here in the dialogue of the Caitanya-caritamrta, there's a specific enumeration of particular qualities that are well known to be present in Vaishnavas. So Mahaprabhu says, Se sab gun hoy Vaishnavar lakan, sab koha na jai kori dig darashan. All those qualities that are infused in a bhakta by Krishna by virtue of bhakti are characteristics of Vaishnavas. Describing them all is not possible, so I will just give a survey. So a long list is cited in order to give you an impression, but not to be a complete list. In other words, this long stack of qualities gives you some idea, and there are also many more. Or also it can be analyzed, described from different angles of vision. But the point is that this bhakti becomes a bouquet, if you will, of wonderful qualities. So, in the following 5 verses, various qualities of Vaishnavas are enumerated as an indication of, I think that should be the profusion of qualities found in Vaishnavas that is so vast it cannot be fully described. So here Mahaprabhu goes on for 3 payars, just giving a straight list. There's no verb or object in the sentence. It's not even a sentence, it's just a list. So I'll read these 3. Kripalu akrita droha satyasara sama nirdosha vadanya mridu suchiya kinchana sarvopakaraka shanta krishnaika sharana akama anihastira vijita shadguna mitabhuka pramatta manada mani gambira karuna maitra kavidaksha muni. Sympathetic, non-malicious, steadfast in truth, equipoised, faultless, generous, gentle, virtuous, possessionless, supportive of all, peaceful, of shelter solely in Krishna, desireless, non-active in worldly pursuits, steady, victorious over the 6 attributes of worldly existence, a measured eater, non-negligent, respectful, undesirous of respect, deep, compassionate, friendly, wise, expert, sagacious. So this is a list. Now we'll look at these in more detail. This list of qualities given in the last 3 payars almost exactly matches a list of qualities of a sadhu, a list of the characteristics of a sadhu enumerated by Bhagavan Sri Krishna to Sri Uddhava in Srimad Bhagavatam. So just to save time, I won't read that whole list again, because it's entirely the same apart from the following. The only disparity between these 2 lists is that in these verses from Srimad Bhagavatam, the quality of being controlled is stated in contrast to the quality of being generous, stated in the payars under discussion. So here's a Bengali list of verses, of qualities, which nearly identically matches 3 verses in the Bhagavatam. So we'll look at the commentaries on the Bhagavatam on these list of verses, and then we'll get an idea of what is really referred to, or some finer idea of what is referred to by these qualities. Sri Sanatana Pad explains in his commentary on these verses from Srimad Bhagavatam that they are spoken by Bhagavan Sri Krishna in response to the query from Uddhava, whom do you consider a sadhu? He also explains why these qualities are said to be the qualities of a bhakta of Bhagavan, with reference to the same verse from Srimad Bhagavatam that was cited prior to the payars under discussion here in Caitanya-caritamrta. So here's Sanatana Gosvami now making some comments related to the verse of Prahlad that we just discussed. Quote, although these qualities, beginning with being intolerant of others' suffering, can exist in others to some extent, still, as per the principles stated in Bhagavatam 5.18.12, quote, the suras along with all qualities reside in full within one who has unconditional bhakti to Bhagavan. The complete or true presence of all these qualities is in bhaktas of Bhagavan alone. So here Sanatana Gosvami, he's also taking up this subject, which is sometimes brought up as to, how this verse can appear to say that someone who's not a bhakta can't have any qualities at all. So he's saying that these qualities can exist in others to some extent. He's not denying that. But the complete or true presence of these qualities is in bhaktas only. Alternately, being a bhakta of Bhagavan is made known by these qualities because of the pervasion of fixity of these qualities only in them, that is, only in bhaktas of Bhagavan, on account of only bhaktas of Bhagavan being possessed of pure being, shuddha sattvikata, and thus being unwavering in their retention and consistent expression of these qualities, unlike those whose psyche remains impure, and thus will invariably be inconsistent in their retention and expression of the aforementioned qualities. This is the direction. In other words, someone's behavior, the qualities that they show, is ultimately an external exhibition of the state of the conditioning of the psyche. So if the person's psyche still has samskars, still has vasanas for various worldly things, then some unsavory behavior is definitely going to come out sooner or later. It's only a bhakta, or someone in whose mind is, and here we're talking about a bhakta in the complete sense, or in the accomplished sense, that only a bhakta's mind is completely pure, and thus only in the mind of a bhakta will all these qualities be consistently expressed, or truly expressed, because there isn't any contamination in the mind that will couple the expression of these qualities with faults. So this is Sanatana Goswami's point. In other words, that, there can be qualities in others to the extent that they may have, a sattvic mental state or what have you, but there won't be a complete or unwavering presence of these qualities in anyone whose mind is not fully purified. And from the Gaudiya Vaishnava acaryas' perspective, it's only bhaktas who reach the state of having a fully purified mind. So, like that, he explains this matter regarding who and where these qualities can be found, to what extent. So now, let's look at what these qualities actually are. We may not have time to get through them all, but I've given some succinct explanation here, drawing from Samipad's commentary, Sanatanapad's commentary, Jiva Gosvami's commentary, and Cakravartipad's commentary. And in many cases, they just write the exact same thing. Only on certain times do they offer alternate interpretations. So I've given it in a condensed way. In other words, wherever they just agree, I've only written that once, and I've just added elaborations where they offer different interpretations. So, kripalu, sympathetic, that is, intolerant of others' worldly suffering. So in other words, one feels uncomfortable when another is in a state of suffering or discomfort or unrest. One isn't indifferent to that, one is rather sympathetic to it. Akrita droha, non-malicious, towards anyone among all embodied beings, even someone who is malicious towards oneself, So it's easy to be non-malicious towards your friends or towards people who you get something from, but to be non-malicious towards everyone, and even persons who are harmful towards you, this is a great quality. There's a Subhashita I remember reading somewhere. It said, those who are good to the people who are good to them, this is nothing special. Those who are but those who are good even to the people who are bad to them, they're really good. So this same point is made here by Chakravarti Pad, that to be non-malicious even towards the persons who are malicious towards oneself. And that is, you could say, possible by virtue of the following quality, titikshu, to be forbearing, that is, forgiving and tolerant of offenses from all embodied beings, the high, the intermediate, and the low, even those against oneself. So sometimes we can be tolerant of offenses from persons in a position of power or persons in a position of superiority to us, but when someone inferior to us or some peer of ours does something that's disturbing or offensive to us, then we think, oh, we don't have to tolerate anything like this. So to be truly forbearing is to tolerate even offenses or disturbances coming from anyone, be they superior, equal, or inferior. And even if those offenses are not against others or against the environment in general, but directly against ourselves. So if one can forbear, can tolerate those things, then also one can know maliciousness or no sense of retaliation will emerge. So these two qualities are related. Satyasar, steadfast in truth, being one whose core, that is, steadfastness or strength, is in truth. So when one has, takes truth to be one's strength, so to speak, then one, relies on that or has confidence that, as the Upanishadic statement made into the motto of India says, Satyameva Jayate, the truth alone shall prevail. So one who has that type of conviction, then they'll remain, adherent to the truth and have confidence in, what is actually true, even if others may take to fallacious means or what have you. So also to say that the steadfastness is in truth means it's not to a group or a person or an institution or some, matter of loyalty in the world, so to speak. And a lot of times tests of characters arise where there's a clash between integrity and loyalty, and whether one is truly adherent to what is like true or meaningful in an absolute sense, or what is perceived to be truth by a limited group, that test comes to determine whether one is satyasar or not, so to speak. Then, unavadhyatma, irreproachable in character, free from the faults of detraction of others and the like. So I've given asuya here as detraction. Sometimes people translate asuya as envy or something like this, but as per other places where our acaryas have commented on the word asuya, they take it to mean detraction. In other words, to attribute faults even to others' qualities, or to direct one's attention towards shortcomings even in the excellences of others. In other words, if, someone wins a championship, then someone in the fault of detraction will be, well, they only won by a small amount, or they didn't maintain good form while they did that thing that they won the test with, or they'll find some way of turning the thing into something negative when it's actually, broadly speaking, or predominantly something positive. This is the tendency of detraction. So to be irreproachable in character is to be free from that tendency as well as others. Sama, equipoised, evenly disposed in the midst of happiness and suffering, as well as respect and disrespect. So it's very easy to sit here and read these things. I feel like rather embarrassed. These are ideals, these are qualities, we aspire to them. They're important to hear again and again, and also, very important point will come at the end of this discussion, how fundamentally bhaktas come to acquire these qualities, or what is the internal hierarchy between them. That will come out a little bit later. Sarvapakarakaha, supportive of all to the extent of one's ability, a benefactor and well-wisher or friend of all. So one may not be able to support every single beggar that one walks by on the street, but according to one's ability, one tries to be supportive of others, according to the means that they have. Kamer ahatadhi, of mind unimpaired that is undisturbed by objects of desire. Danta, controlled, of aptly regulated external senses. Mridu, gentle, non-hard-hearted. Shuchi, virtuous, endowed with proper conduct. Akinchana, possessionless, non-accepting of anything unnecessary. So, in the verse we just discussed, akinchana was glossed as nishkama. So that's also a common gloss, but in this case, it's given by all the commentators, all four, as a parigraha. So to be possessionless, they don't take it to be 100% possessionless in that you don't have clothes or a blanket or, like absolute possessionlessness, but rather that you don't accept or acquire things that are unnecessary. So in the path of bhakti, Rupa Gosvami writes of what he calls yavat anuvartita. In other words, to proceed according to requirement. In other words, to accept what is required such that one can efficiently or optimally engage in one's observance of the path of bhakti without more or less. And he cites a verse from perhaps the Naradiya Purana, I don't remember off the top of my head, which says that one's practice will be hampered if one accepts too much and if one accepts too little. And typically people don't struggle with accepting too little, although here in Braj, sometimes among the Vairagis, it can get too extreme, and there are some who regret the level of extreme austerity that they observed later in life. There is a delicacy in that respect, but more prominently, there's excessive acceptance of things that are unnecessary and ultimately waste one's time, hamper one's focus, distract one's mind, and so forth. So to be akinchana is to not accept anything that isn't really necessary and conducive to progress on the path. Aniha, non-active, so free from visible or worldly activity. So it doesn't mean literally not doing anything, but it means not doing anything that's merely for a worldly purpose or merely an activity that aims at something other than the satisfaction of Bhagavan. So there's 26 qualities in this stack. That's 13, that's halfway. So I'll just stop here because we're out of time for today. And we can resume our review of all these qualities and then a few more that come in the later verses next time. So in summary, we've heard this principle of how those who have unconditional bhakti become imbued with all these virtues, and then we've looked at some of these virtues that come to bhaktas by virtue of their bhakti. So if anyone has any comments, questions, corrections, or feedback of any other type, please feel free to share.
Although these are qualities that manifest, I assume, automatically in the progression of bhakti, there is something to be said for trying to cultivate them, right?
Yes.
Well, along those lines, as an American living in the United States right now, it's very challenging to have those qualities, and I do aspire for them, and I feel like that's part of my sadhana. But I would be curious as to, because I understand you're an American also.
Yes, I'm not in
How
America at the moment, but I am by nationality an American.
Yes. So I would be curious as to how you handled the situation internally, like, or maybe, yes, I'd be curious any advice you might have.
Okay, well, I'll just say that I seldom ever read the news, so what is quote unquote the situation, I'm probably not very informed. So I may not have the sensitivity to, the social context or the political context that you might be referring to.
Yes, no, I appreciate that. I think that's part of the sadhana is to not read the news.
Yeah, I mean, different social movements and, ups and downs, the Rajas Tamas, are cycling around and around, and, all these different political isms that rise and fall, and different, ideologies and narratives that get spun around. These are all things that are never going to work. Or, in other words, there is no one singular political or social or cultural or educational or economic ideology that is completely faultless and that will completely fix all problems. So there's a perpetual, observation of the mutual shortcomings or the mutual insensitivities of different things that are out there on the table or vying for popular, appeal. And so we have to always avoid, from a spiritual perspective, we want to avoid becoming excessively engrossed or excessively absorbed in those kind of matters, because we know that there's no ultimate ever cessation or complete resolution to them. And that also, as soon as certain issues may well be resolved or given justice, new injustices and new, people with nefarious intentions will also emerge. So, which one is up in power now and who will take him down and then do other similar stuff later? Yeah. I don't want to sound excessively, unconcerned, because there is a necessity in the world for people dealing with that. But in my personal opinion, those who are so fortunate as to become acquainted with the path of Uttam Bhakti, to become acquainted with the teachings of our Goswamis, to hear about this most wonderful thing called Raganuga Bhakti, people to feel some interest in that, to feel some admiration for that, to feel that there's something really worthwhile in spending one's life in relation to that very small demographic in the world that has that kind of blessedness. There's plenty of other people in the world to deal with all the problems and vie for, what is proportionately or relatively perhaps slightly less problematic than the other solution on the table. Bhaktas who have that level of blessedness need not be excessively concerned about those things. No doubt, for the sake of what they call loka samgraha or social cohesion, some, due level of being informed and responsible in one's, the consumption or the level of social impact that one has in one's simplistic lifestyle. Something is to be, maintained for the respect of our tradition, the respect of bhaktas in society, and for respect for all the, elements of this human social system that are also ultimately put in place by Bhagavan and made possible to make the whole world and everything take place. So we're also very grateful, and we also want to respect those things in connection with our spiritual ideals. So we want to find a balance where it doesn't unnecessarily distract us from the absorption that we aspire to as bhaktas, And at the same time, we want to show, due respect to our whatever token presence we have and role we have in the society in a way that is dignified for the members of our tradition in the eyes of society in general, as far as that's possible. Some people will always, I've gone to so many airports and the, people at the customs, checking you into the country going like, you're a monk, you don't have a job, what are you doing here? What are you contributing to our society? There's always going to be people who may not perceive, persons of a principally spiritual orientation as making a meaningful contribution to society. So we can't necessarily aspire to please everybody, but nevertheless,
Right.
to be, have a fundamental level of respect for the people who, lay the internet cables and take out the trash and do everything, pave the roads and do everything else that we take advantage on a daily basis of without ever having done anything for. We want to show respect to that and at the same time not let it distract us from our spiritual ideals. So how that will be worked out is a personal thing. Individuals will, come in somewhere slightly different on that spectrum, if you will, and I think there's room for diversity in how devotees feel inspired to respond in those circumstances. But on the whole, in terms of, grievous injustices or, intense cultural wars and stuff like that, not to let ourselves get too carried away by that kind of thing. To put it simply.
That's very helpful. That's very helpful, and hearing those qualities is also very helpful. It's a good reminder of how we should be, and just as Vraja Vinodini said, to be able to try and cultivate those things. And Babaji has also talked about being tolerant a lot lately, and just learning how to tolerate. So thank you. Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've noticed myself, I'm very shocked at how my internal identity is linked to being an American. So when I see the whole country going under, I'm like shocked at, I didn't realize I was so attached to that identity. So
Yes.
for me, it's like, it's very subtle just to see people become outrageously offensive, hateful, mean. I'm shocked by the whole thing. And then I have to see those qualities in myself. So that's my perspective. It's like holding up a mirror and realizing, oh my God,
Yeah.
look at me,
I hear
I'm
you.
terrible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a good mirror for us. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing those reflections, especially when there's,
Thank you for sharing those qualities.
intense clashes between people, to also be able to perceive the fundamental respectability that exists inherent in all beings, independent of their ideological positions. This is a very, one, you could say, very practical spiritual tool in a time when people aren't able to agree or disagree based on the way they think, is to bring people's attention towards the fact that by virtue of the presence of Bhagavan in every living entity is worthy of respect, irrespective of whatever they think and even whatever they do. And regardless of how much we might disapprove of their behavior, everyone has a certain inherent, honorability that is to be sustained from a spiritual perspective. So that spiritual perspective can actually be a useful de-escalation premise that, can help on a personal level as well as may have some social utility.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we'll close here for tonight, and if we're so blessed, then next week we'll hear more about these qualities that manifest in the hearts of bhaktas by virtue of bhakti, by the grace of Bhagavan, and then we'll hear beyond that. We'll probably end up talking most of the time about qualities again next time, and then we'll look at the influence of Sangha and how association and different types of association lead to the acquisition of these qualities or the absence thereof. Vaishnavebhyo Namo Nama. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.
Jai.